March 1940. Britain is slowly being strangled. Not by bombs falling on London, not by tanks rolling across the countryside, but by something far more insidious. The silent disappearance of ships in the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Every week, another convoy sets out from North American ports, loaded with food, fuel, medicine, and raw materials, and every week fewer ships make it back. The numbers tell a terrifying story. In the first 4 months of 1940 alone, German U-boats send over 250 Allied ships to the bottom of the Atlantic. That's not just statistics on a naval chart. That's thousands of tons of food that will never reach British tables, fuel that will never power British factories, sailors who will never see home again. Britain imports roughly 55 million tons of supplies every year just to survive. The island nation produces only about 30% of its own food. Without those convoys, the country faces starvation within months. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, knows exactly what he's doing. He's perfected the Wolfpack tactic. Groups of submarines hunting together, coordinating attacks, overwhelming convoy escorts. His U-boats don't fight fair. They strike at night, surfacing to attack in darkness where British ASDIC sonar can't detect them. A single torpedo can sink a 10,000-ton freighter in minutes. The crew, if they're lucky, might have time to abandon ship before the freezing Atlantic water claims them. British convoy commodores face impossible choices every single voyage. Sail faster and leave the slower merchant ships behind. Zigzag to avoid torpedoes but burn precious fuel. Stick together for protection but present a bigger target. Every decision could mean life or death for hundreds of men. Winston Churchill, who becomes Prime Minister in May 1940, will later write, "The U-boat peril was the only thing that ever really frightened me during the war." Think about that for a moment. This is a man facing Nazi invasion, the Blitz, the fall of France, and what keeps him up at night is the silent hunters prowling beneath the waves. By spring 1940, Britain's merchant fleet is dying faster than shipyards can replace it. The Royal Navy is stretched impossibly thin, trying to escort convoys, hunt submarines, and defend the homeland all at once. Destroyer captains are running their ships into the ground, racing from one convoy to the next. Never enough escorts to go around. Some convoys cross with only 1 or 2 warships, protecting 30 or 40 merchant vessels. And here's what makes it worse. The German submariners are getting bolder. They're operating in groups now, sharing intelligence, calling in their packmates when they spot a convoy. One U-boat would shadow the merchantmen during daylight, radioing position reports. Then at nightfall, 5 or 6 submarines would converge for a coordinated massacre. British sailors start calling this period the happy time. But that's the German nickname. For the U-boat crews, it's target practice. For the Allies, it's a nightmare. But the Wolfpacks aren't even the worst of Britain's problems. Because while Churchill and his admirals are focused on the U-boat threat, another killer is lurking in the waters. One that doesn't hunt in packs, doesn't need a crew, and strikes without warning in places where ships should be completely safe. November 21, 1939. The British destroyer HMS Gypsy is steaming through the Thames estuary, just off the English coast. This isn't enemy waters. This is practically Britain's front yard, a channel the Royal Navy has swept for mines dozens of times. Then, without warning, a massive explosion tears through the ship's hull. Gypsy goes down in minutes. No torpedo wake, no periscope sighting, no warning whatsoever. 3 days later, it happens again. The merchant ship SS Thistledown Maru explodes in the same area. Then another, and another. Ships are blowing up in harbors, river mouths, and coastal waters that should be completely safe. The explosions are catastrophic. Entire bows ripped off, ships broken in half, crews killed instantly. By early December 1939, over a dozen vessels have been lost in British home waters, and nobody has a clue what's causing it. The Admiralty is baffled. These aren't torpedo attacks. There's no evidence of submarine activity in these shallow, heavily patrolled areas. These aren't traditional contact mines either. British minesweepers have combed these routes repeatedly and found nothing. Ships are simply sailing along, going about their business and then suddenly ceasing to exist in a fountain of water and twisted metal. Panic starts creeping into British shipping. Captains who faced U-boats in the Atlantic without flinching are now terrified to enter their own ports. Because at least with a U-boat, you know what you're fighting. You can zigzag, deploy escorts, drop depth charges, but this is like fighting a ghost. Crews start calling the Thames estuary the death trap. Some merchant captains flatly refuse to sail through certain channels, even under direct orders. The losses keep mounting through December and into January 1940. The battleship HMS Nelson, 45,000 tons of British naval power, hits something off Scotland and barely limps into port with her bow nearly blown off. If capital ships aren't safe, nothing is. Britain's ports are becoming graveyards, and the Royal Navy doesn't even know what's killing the ships. Then comes the break. November 23, 1939, just 2 days after HMS Gypsy went down, a German aircraft is spotted dropping something by parachute into the mudflats near Sheerness at low tide. When the tide goes out, British bomb disposal experts cautiously approach. What they find changes everything. It's a mine, but unlike anything the Royal Navy has seen before. No contact horns, no visible detonation mechanism. It's sitting there in the mud, looking almost harmless. Lieutenant Commander John Overy and his team spend hours carefully examining it, knowing one wrong move could vaporize them and the answer to Britain's mystery. They work with freezing water lapping at their feet as the tide comes back in, racing against time. What they discover inside sends shockwaves through the Admiralty. This mine doesn't wait for a ship to bump into it. It doesn't need any physical contact at all. Inside the casing is something far more sinister, a magnetic sensor that detects the metal hull of passing ships. When a vessel sails overhead, the mine feels the magnetic field of all that steel and iron, then detonates. The Germans have weaponized physics itself. Suddenly, everything makes horrible sense. The shallow water attacks, the harbor explosions, the minesweepers sailing right over the weapons without triggering them. Britain isn't just fighting submarines anymore. It's fighting an invisible enemy that turns every ship's own metal hull into a death sentence. Captured magnetic mine lands on the desk of a man who has no business being in the Royal Navy at all. Charles Goode is a Canadian chemistry professor who came to Britain on an academic fellowship before the war. He's not a military man. He's not a naval architect. He's a scientist who got swept up in Britain's desperate scramble to mobilize every available brain against the Nazi threat. In late 1939, the Admiralty creates something called the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, basically a dumping ground for unconventional ideas and the odd people who come up with them. Goode fits right. And when the magnetic mine problem reaches his office in early 1940, most naval officers are thinking in traditional terms: build better minesweepers, develop stronger hull plating, map the minefields more carefully. These are sensible, logical approaches from experienced seamen. Goode looks at the problem completely differently. He understands something the admirals don't. This isn't a naval problem. It's a physics problem. The mine doesn't care about armor thickness or ship design. It's responding to magnetic fields. Every ship is essentially a giant magnet floating through the water. Steel hulls become magnetized during construction. The hammering, the welding, the shaping of metal all align the iron molecules in Earth's magnetic field. Even after a ship launches, it carries this magnetic signature. And that signature is what's killing crews. Goode's solution sounds absolutely insane when he first proposes it. He wants to wrap entire ships in electrical cable and run current through them. Thousands of feet of wire coiled around hulls, powered by onboard generators, creating an electromagnetic field that cancels out the ship's natural magnetism. He wants to make ships magnetically invisible. The initial reaction from the Admiralty is about what you'd expect. Senior naval officers who've spent 30 years at sea are being told by a university professor that they need to turn their warships into floating electromagnets. Some think he's joking. Others think he's wasted their time. One admiral reportedly asks if Goode has been drinking, but Goode has the math to back it up. He explains that every magnetic field has polarity, north and south. The ship's hull creates one field. If you generate an equal and opposite field around it, the two cancel each other out. It's the same principle as noise-canceling headphones, except instead of sound waves, you're canceling magnetic fields. To the mine's sensors, the ship simply wouldn't exist. It would sail right over the weapon and the magnetic trigger would never activate. There's just one tiny problem. Nobody has ever tried this on anything bigger than a rowboat. Goode is proposing to degauss. That's the technical term. Named after the unit of magnetic field strength, every single vessel in the British fleet. Battleships, destroyers, cargo ships, tankers, trawlers, thousands upon thousands of vessels. Each one requiring custom calculations, precise wire placement, and careful calibration. The logistics are staggering, and Britain doesn't have time. Ships are exploding daily. The magnetic mines are spreading to every major shipping channel around the British Isles. U-boats are already sinking merchant vessels in open water. Now ships can't even reach ports safely. If the Royal Navy spends months testing and debating Goode's idea, there might not be a fleet left to save. So despite the skepticism, despite the astronomical scale of the task, despite the fact that it sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, the Admiralty gives Goode permission to try. They don't have better options. Sometimes in war, you have to bet everything on the crazy idea. Here's what makes the magnetic mine so diabolically clever. Earth itself is a giant magnet, with magnetic field lines running from the North Pole to the South Pole. When you build a ship, hammering steel plates, welding joints, bending metal into shape, you're doing all this construction in Earth's magnetic field. The iron molecules in the steel gradually align themselves with that field. Like tiny compass needles all pointing the same direction, the ship becomes permanently magnetized, carrying what scientists call a magnetic signature. This signature is strongest at the ship's ends, the bow and stern, where the hull curves most dramatically. A typical 10,000-ton cargo ship creates a magnetic field strong, enough to be detected from 30 feet away. Battleships, with their massive steel armor, create even stronger fields. The field doesn't shut off when the crew goes home. It doesn't disappear in fog or darkness. It's always there, radiating from the hull like a beacon that says, "Detonate here." German engineers understood this perfectly when they designed their weapon. The mine sits on the seabed, patient and silent. Inside its waterproof casing, a magnetometer, essentially a sensitive compass, monitors the ambient magnetic field. When a ship passes overhead, the magnetometer detects the sudden change in field strength. Once that change crosses a preset threshold, an electrical circuit closes. Current flows to the detonator. 650 pounds of high explosive turn the seafloor into a killing zone. The beauty of the design from Germany's perspective is that it's practically unsweepable. Traditional mines bob on the surface or float just beneath it, attached to anchors by cables. Minesweepers can cut those cables or detonate the mines with gunfire. But magnetic mines sit directly on the bottom in shallow water. Minesweepers sailing overhead just trigger them like any other ship. Britain lost several minesweepers this way before they figured out what was happening. Goode's degaussing solution attacks the problem at its source. If you can't hide the ship's metal, cancel out its magnetic field. The technique requires wrapping the ship in a long cable loop, sometimes a single loop around the entire hull, sometimes multiple loops at different heights. When electrical current flows through this cable, it generates its own magnetic field. According to principles discovered by physicist Hans Christian Ørsted back in 1820, the trick is getting the polarity right. If the ship's hull has a magnetic north pole at the bow, you run current through the degaussing cable in a direction that creates a south pole at the same location. The two fields interact and neutralize each other. Do this correctly around the entire hull, and the ship's magnetic signature drops from 30 feet to just a few inches. Too weak to trigger the mine sensors, but here's where it gets complicated. Every ship is different. A destroyer built in Glasgow has a different magnetic signature than a freighter built in Newcastle. The intensity varies based on steel composition, construction methods, how long ago the ship was built, even which direction it was facing in the shipyard. You can't just wrap a standard cable around every vessel and call it done. Each ship needs individual measurement, custom calculations, and precise calibration. Goode realizes he's not just solving a physics problem. He's trying to reinvent ship construction procedures for the entire British merchant and naval fleet, and he needs to do it in weeks, not years. The first test happens in January 1940 at HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's torpedo and mining school in Portsmouth. Goode and his team select a small minesweeper, HMS Bore, as their guinea pig. They spend 3 days measuring the ship's magnetic field from every angle using sensitive magnetometers borrowed from university physics departments. Then, they wrap 2,000 feet of heavy electrical cable around the hull in a carefully calculated pattern, connected to a generator and flip the switch. The results are stunning. The ship's magnetic signature drops by over 90%. When they sail HMS Bore over test magnetic sensors, the instruments barely register anything. It's as if the ship has vanished from the magnetic spectrum. Goode's crazy idea actually works, but success creates its own nightmare. One test ship is a proof of concept. Britain operates over 9,000 merchant vessels, plus hundreds of Royal Navy warships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and countless auxiliary craft. Every single one needs degaussing if they're going to survive passage through British waters. And ships keep arriving daily. American freighters, Canadian escorts, requisition trawlers, emergency-built cargo vessels. The queue never stops growing. Goode does the math, and it's terrifying. Each ship requires approximately 2,000 feet of thick copper cable. That's over 18 million feet of cable for the merchant fleet alone, enough to wrap around the Earth's equator. Britain's copper supplies are already strained, supporting electrical infrastructure, munitions, and aircraft manufacturing. Now Goode needs an entire additional supply chain just for degaussing cable. Then there's the installation problem. You can't just hire any electrician off the street. The cable placement must be precise. Wrong positioning and the degaussing field won't cancel the hull's magnetism. Too much current and you risk fires or damaged systems. Too little and the ship remains vulnerable. Each installation requires trained personnel who understand both electrical engineering and naval architecture. Britain doesn't have those people. Every qualified engineer is already working 16-hour days on radar. Aircraft engines or code-breaking. Goode needs to create an entire degaussing workforce, train them in weeks, and deploy them to shipyards across Britain and eventually allied ports worldwide. The Admiralty establishes degaussing stations at major ports: Portsmouth, Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff. Each gets magnetometer equipment, cable supplies, and hastily trained technical crews. Ships arriving in port are immediately measured. Calculations made, cable wound around hulls, generators installed. The whole process takes about 48 hours per ship, if everything goes perfectly. It never goes perfectly. Ships arrive damaged from attacks, requiring repairs first. Cable shipments get delayed. Generators malfunction. Workers make measurement errors and have to start over. And through all of this, U-boats are still hunting outside the harbors, waiting for degaussed ships to emerge and join convoys heading into the Atlantic. Goode realizes he needs a faster solution for the massive backlog. His team develops a simplified system called wiping. Ships steam slowly past a shoreline installation where massive electromagnets temporarily neutralize their magnetic fields. It's not permanent, but it lasts several weeks. Wiping stations go up at harbor entrances, processing multiple ships per day instead of one every 2 days. By March 1940, Britain is degaussing ships faster than Germany can lay magnetic mines, but it's a desperate race against time. Speed becomes everything. Goode's operation transforms from a small experimental program into the largest crash engineering project in British history. By April 1940, degaussing stations are operating around the clock. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sparks fly from welding torches at midnight. Exhausted electricians measure magnetic fields at dawn. Cable crews work through air raids, ignoring sirens, because every hour a ship sits waiting is an hour it can't carry desperately needed supplies. The Admiralty pulls workers from anywhere they can find them. Retired electricians are called back. University physics students are drafted straight from lecture halls. Women join degaussing crews in unprecedented numbers, operating magnetometers, calculating cable patterns. Work that requires precision and math, not physical strength. By summer 1940, over 3,000 people are working in degaussing operations across Britain. The logistics are mind-bending. Cable arrives by the ton, wound on massive reels. Workers develop specialized techniques for handling the heavy copper wire, thick as a man's thumb, weighing several pounds per foot. Getting it around a ship's hull means lowering crews on scaffolding, securing the cable with brackets every few feet, making sure connections are waterproof and won't corrode in seawater. On a large freighter, Installation takes a full day of grueling labor. Then there's testing. After installation, every ship must be measured again to verify the degaussing. Ships steam slowly through designated testing areas while shore-based magnetometers record their signatures. If readings are still too high, crews go back, adjust current, reposition cables, troubleshoot. Some vessels require 3 or 4 attempts before they're properly neutralized. The program expands beyond British shores. Canada establishes degaussing stations in Halifax and Montreal. American ports, technically neutral until December 1941, quietly set up degaussing for ships joining British convoys. Gibraltar, Alexandria, Cape Town, Bombay, anywhere Allied shipping concentrates. Degaussing follows. Goode's team writes training manuals. Ships' equipment overseas. Trains foreign crews, but ships keep dying. June 1940 brings catastrophe on multiple fronts. France falls, giving U-boats access to Atlantic ports like Brest and Lorient, cutting 450 miles off their hunting range. Suddenly, German submarines can stay on patrol much longer, hitting convoys farther from British shores, and while thousands of ships now have degaussing protection against magnetic mines, they're still vulnerable to torpedoes in open water. The Admiralty faces brutal triage decisions: prioritize warships or merchant vessels, new ships or older ones, fast ships that might outrun U-boats or slow cargo haulers carrying the most tonnage. Every choice means some ships wait longer, remain vulnerable, face higher risk goods. Crews work through the Blitz. London's docks burn from German bombing raids, but degaussing continues. Liverpool takes devastating hits in May 1941. Over 2,000 civilians killed, the port battered, but the degaussing station keeps operating. Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff, all endure air raids while cable crews keep wrapping ships. By the end of 1940, Britain has degaussed over 4,000 vessels. By mid-1941, that number exceeds 10,000. It's an engineering achievement that rivals building the ships themselves, done under wartime conditions with limited resources, constant enemy action, and the knowledge that every delay costs lives at sea. The numbers tell the story better than words. In the first 3 months of 1940, before degaussing became widespread, magnetic mines sank or damaged 115 British ships in home waters. By late 1940, after thousands of vessels received protection, that number drops to fewer than 20 in the same period. By 1941, magnetic mine losses become almost negligible, less than a dozen vessels. For the entire year, Goode's crazy idea has essentially neutralized Germany's wonder weapon. But saving ships from magnetic mines is only half the battle. The Atlantic itself remains a killing field. U-boats don't care whether a ship is degaussed or not. Torpedoes destroy hulls regardless of magnetic signatures, and 1941 becomes the most brutal year of the convoy war. Dönitz has over 100 operational U-boats by year's end. His Wolfpacks maul convoys with terrifying efficiency. In November 1941 alone, U-boats sink 62 Allied ships totaling over 300,000 tons. Yet degaussing gives convoys something they desperately need: predictability. Before, merchant captains faced threats from multiple directions: torpedoes in deep water, magnetic mines in shallow water, air attacks near coasts. Ships ran a gauntlet from North America to Britain with no safe zones. Degaussing eliminates one variable. Convoys can now focus entirely on the U-boat threat. Escort commanders don't have to worry about ships exploding in harbor approaches. Vessels can take evasive routes through shallow coastal waters, where submarines can't follow, because magnetic mines no longer pose a threat. The British can concentrate defensive resources, destroyers, aircraft radar on anti-submarine warfare. The psychological impact is enormous, merchant. Crews who watched ships blow up in supposedly safe harbors now have confidence their degaussed vessels can actually reach port. Morale improves. Sailors stop refusing assignments. The steady drumbeat of mystery explosions that terrorized British shipping in late 1939 and early 1940 simply stops. Ships still sink, plenty of them. But at least crews know what they're fighting. By 1942, degaussing becomes so routine, it's barely mentioned in naval reports. Every ship gets degaussed as automatically as it gets painted. New vessels are built with degaussing coils already installed. Liberty ships rolling off. American production lines at 3 per day all include Degaussing as standard equipment. What seemed impossible in January 1940, protecting the entire Allied fleet, becomes normal operating procedure by 1942. The Germans try to adapt. They modify magnetic mines with more sensitive triggers, add acoustic sensors, combine magnetic and pressure detonators. But every adaptation requires new mine production, new deployment, and Britain's minesweepers, now that they understand the threat, become far more effective. The Battle of the WWII, Atlantic continues until May 1945. U-boats remain deadly until Germany's surrender, but the magnetic mine threat that nearly paralyzed British shipping in 1940 never recovers. Goode's solution holds. Ships continue crossing the Atlantic, keeping Britain fed, supplied, and in the fight, not because they're invincible, but because one less weapon can kill them. Charles Goode never becomes a household name. No monuments honor him. No Hollywood films dramatize his achievement. While codebreakers at Bletchley Park and radar scientists at Worth Matravers receive post-war recognition, the man who saved thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives remains largely unknown. Outside naval engineering circles, that's often how war works. The most crucial innovations happen quietly, solved by people nobody's heard of, while headlines focus on battles and generals. But the impact of his work extends far beyond World War II. Degaussing becomes permanent naval doctrine for every major navy worldwide. Modern warships still use degaussing systems, now sophisticated, computer-controlled installations that continuously adjust to changing magnetic conditions. Submarines, which must avoid detection by magnetic anomaly detectors, use even more advanced technology. The same principles protect undersea cables, scientific instruments, and sensitive electronics. Goode's broader legacy lies in how he approached the problem. He didn't think like a naval officer bound by tradition. He thought like a scientist who understood that modern warfare increasingly meant fighting physics itself. Radar was turning air combat into an electromagnetic chess game. Sonar was making submarine warfare a battle of sound waves, and magnetic mines had weaponized Earth's own magnetic field. Victory would go to whoever best understood and exploited scientific principles. The Royal Navy recognized this shift. The Department of Miscellaneous Weapons development evolved into a permanent institution. Britain established closer ties between universities and military research. Scientists stopped being treated as eccentric outsiders and became integral to defense planning. Goode himself rose to become Director of Naval Land Equipment, then Controller of Research and Development for the Ministry of Supply. After the war, he received a knighthood and continued working on scientific problems until his death in 1980. But perhaps the most important lesson from the Degaussing story is about institutional flexibility under pressure. The Royal Navy in 1940 was one of history's most tradition-bound organizations, centuries of customs, protocols, and procedures. Yet, when faced with an existential threat, when ships were exploding and conventional solutions weren't working, the Admiralty gave a university professor with a wild idea the authority to rewire their entire fleet. That kind of institutional courage is rare. Think about what Britain accomplished in less than 2 years. They took a theoretical concept, proved it worked, scaled it to thousands of ships, trained thousands of workers, established global infrastructure, and essentially solved a problem that threatened to starve the nation into surrender. All while fighting a war on multiple fronts, enduring bombing raids, facing possible invasion, operating under absolute desperation. The convoys kept sailing. Britain survived, and though degaussing was just one factor among convoy tactics, escort carriers, long-range aircraft, code-breaking, and sheer courage, it eliminated one deadly threat at precisely the moment when Britain couldn't afford any more losses. Sometimes in war, the craziest idea turns out to be the right one. Sometimes, wrapping ships in miles of electrical cable and turning them into electromagnets is exactly what saves a nation. And sometimes, the hero isn't the admiral on the bridge or the pilot in the cockpit. It's a Canadian chemistry professor who understood magnetism better than anyone thought possible.